Hi, everybody. I hope you're all doing super well. First of all, I'm really sorry if you can hear the dogs barking in the background. Those are neighborhood dogs. I can't stop them, but we're going to ignore them. Um, First of all, I wanted to say how different it is to be teaching you this way and how much more I prefer to have you in my classroom. And I just can't wait for us to be able to reunite in our classroom sooner rather than later. But for now, let's just stay home, do what we can to take care of ourselves so that we can all get through this together. All right. All right. So today we're going to look at the short story. We're going to be looking at some topics that we already know and then some newer concepts. First of all, what is a short story? A short story is a fictional work of prose that is shorter in length than a novel. So we're looking at a shorter piece of writing that we can read in a half hour to 2 hours, according to Edgar Allan Poe. You remember Edgar Allan Poe? We've read The Telltale Heart by him. He also wrote the poem Annabel Lee. So we're talking about a shorter piece of literature that we can read in one single sitting. Usually, it ranges from 1,000 to 20,000 words, so it can be a little longer than one page, which I know is many of your preference, but it usually doesn't go over 20,000 words, which is a little longer. It focuses on one plot, one main character, with a few additional minor characters, and one central theme. That's different than in a novel, where we might focus on several main characters. There will be usually several themes and subplots going on at the same time as the plot is going on. Alright, so let's talk about the main idea. The main idea is the author's message about a topic. This idea is often expressed directly or it can be implied. So when it says directly, what it means is that it is explicitly written in the story. It is literally there, no doubts about it. However, when it's implied, it's not explicitly written. You have to use the details and the context clues to determine what is the main idea or the message of that author. What you need to use is the details as evidence that support that main idea. So basically, you're going to take all the context clues that are in a story, and those will help you determine what the author's message is. Now, this part is a review. Here we're going to talk about the basic elements of a short story, and I know you've heard this before, but we're just going to go over them really quickly. We have character, plot, theme, point of view, conflict, and setting. First, we have characters. So you know that characters are every individual or animal that is in a story that we're talking about in that story. One story can have a protagonist as well as an antagonist. Now, the protagonist is the main character that we're following in the story. For example, in Black Panther, we would say this individual in the right could be the main character or the protagonist. Then we have an antagonist. The antagonist is the force that goes against the protagonist. So in this case, it would be this man. And as you can see in this picture, there is tension between them because they want opposing things. So we have a protagonist and an antagonist going against each other. Then we have character development. How well developed is each character? So if a character is really well developed, we can identify several character traits for that one individual or animal. That character is round. However, if we have a character that we don't really know much about, we don't know there's no physical descriptions, we don't know their thoughts or their motivations or their desires, then that character would be flat. Then we have change. And by change, it means whether the character undergoes change throughout the plot. If the character ends up different than how that character started. Now, if a character does not change after the events of the plot, that character would be static, not moved, right? Static. However, a character that does experience change would be dynamic. Okay? So when we think about characters, you have to think, is this character well developed or not? How well do I know this character? How much do I know? How many character traits can I identify? And you have to think, has this character changed? Has their motivations changed? Has something happened that has made them realize that they should change? Or maybe there's no reason for them to change. Now, being a static character doesn't necessarily mean that you're a bad character or that you're the antagonist. It simply means that you did not undergo any changes throughout the events of the plot. Moving on to the actual plot, it is divided into 5 parts. First, we have the introduction, and we've talked about this before. That's where we learn who the characters are and the setting. And as we've mentioned before, the setting includes not only the place, but the time. All right, so when I ask you about setting, make sure that you give me as much information about the setting as the story gives you. That means place, time, the season, if it tells you the time of the day or the time of the year, all of those details are part of the setting. Then we have the rising action, which is when the events start to become complicated. It is revealed that there is a conflict in this story that needs to be resolved. Then we have the climax. Now this is the highest point of interest. This is the part where there's most tension in the story, there's a turning point. You want to know what's going to happen next. Is the conflict going to be resolved? Is it not going to be resolved? What's going to happen? Then in the following action, everything starts to resolve itself and you know what occurred. All right, and then finally we have the denouement, and that is the resolution. That's what happens in the end, the final outcome of the story. So here we have a picture that kind of shows you the way that these parts go in. A story is a plot roller coaster, but as you know, we also refer to it as a plot diagram. I've told you it looks a little bit like a witch's hat. So keep this in mind when you're talking about sequence of events or when you're reading the story and you're determining where you are in the plot diagram. What should you be looking for? Are you learning who the characters are? Are you learning about the conflict? Are you in the highest point of interest? Has the conflict started being resolved? And the resolution, which is the end, right? What happens at the very end? All right, now let's talk a little bit about conflict. Conflict is divided in different types. First, we have here at the top, person versus person. So let's say, for example, that one of you really wants to buy a specific car and you've been saving up to buy that car for months. And then your friend also wants that same car. And they've been saving a lot of money as well. So you get into an argument because you both want the same car. It's a used car. It's not like the car in the dealer, so you can't both have it. And then you get into an argument. That would be a person versus person type of conflict. You have a problem against a very specific other person. Then in the bottom, right under it here, We have person versus nature. Now, in Puerto Rico, we had a person versus nature problem, which was Hurricane Maria. But most recently, we had the earthquakes followed by the pandemic. So those are person versus nature issues. Now, nature is, as we know, unpredictable, and there is not a lot that human beings can do to protect themselves against nature. But if you see a story that has any of these natural events, then you know it's a person versus nature type of conflict. Right next to that one, we have person versus society. So that's usually one individual who has a conflict against a group of individuals. So let's take, for example, Rosa Parks. Now, Rosa Parks had an issue with society because society at the time was very racist, right? If you remember the story of Rosa Parks, she wanted to sit in a specific place in the bus, and she wasn't allowed to do so because that area was for white people only. So then she was arrested for just wanting to sit um, somewhere in the bus, right? So she had a problem with society as a whole. It's the same with Martin Luther King. Now, with person versus society conflicts in stories, oftentimes society, because of abundance, if nothing else, tends to win. However, that is not always the case. It is okay to drive against the current for what you believe in, even if it seems uphill. Okay, so there are also stories where it's a person versus society and the person actually does achieve what the person wants in the end. At the bottom left, we have person versus technology. Now, when I think of that, I think about movies like I, Robot, but that might be a little old for you. So think about the show Black Mirror if you've ever seen it. So we could say, robots coming to life and destroying the world. But also, if we think about it more realistically, a person versus technology problem can be as simple as your computer catching a virus and deleting that assignment that you've been working on for many, many hours. That's a person versus technology problem. Then we have person versus supernatural, and the bottom and the middle right here. So if you've seen the show Supernatural, then you know, for example, that would mean fighting werewolves or fighting fairies or an issue with a vampire, all of these things that are not natural and cannot be explained through science because they're supernatural. Okay? A lot of shows and sci-fi are based on that. And then finally, on the bottom right, we have person versus self, himself or herself. So person versus self is an internal conflict. So for example, let's say that you want to join a poetry competition, but you feel like you're not the best poet and you have a self-esteem issue, you're doubting your skills. That's a person versus self type of conflict. Okay? So if we think, let's just take any random movie, let's just think Harry Potter. So in Harry Potter, we could say that there's a person versus supernatural type of conflict because Voldemort is not really, human. But could we also say there are other types of conflict? Absolutely. And this happens in many stories. There's person versus person conflicts between Harry and several characters. There's person versus self societies when there's self doubt and that sort of issue. We could probably find many of these in many stories, okay? So sometimes there will be a main conflict, but there will also be other conflicts going on at the same time. All right, next we have the author's point of view. So when you're reading a story, you have to you have to look at the narrator and determine if it's being narrated in first person, second person, or third person. So first person is narrated using the pronouns I and we. So basically that means, for example, I say, I woke up today and I bought a plane ticket. Then I got on the plane and flew to Los Angeles, right? I'm telling a story about me. Second person is much more unusual. It's when the story is told from the perspective of you. So it's kind of like reading to the narrating towards the reader by saying, like, you woke up this morning, you bought a plane ticket, and you flew to Los Angeles. And then we have third person, which uses the pronouns he, she, or it. So this third person narrator is a complete outsider looking in. Okay, just observing what is happening and describing from the outside. It is not any of the characters in the story. So we have three types: objective, limited omniscient, and omniscient. An objective third person narrator is somebody who can see what's happening and describe it, but doesn't really know what any of the characters are thinking or feeling. A limited omniscient third person narrator knows the viewpoint and the feelings and motivations and thoughts of one single character, but not the rest. And then a third person omniscient knows the every single character's thoughts and behaviors and motivations. Okay, so this is a narrator that knows and sees everything. Okay, but all three of these use the same pronouns: he, she, it, they. Okay, most stories are either in first person or in third person. Second person is not very common. Okay, when you think about a short story, where would you place it in the pie of author's purpose? If we think about pie, the P stands for persuade, which is to convince the reader of a certain point of view. The I stands for inform, to teach or give information to the reader. And the E stands for entertain, which is to hold the attention of the reader through enjoyment. Which one would you think that a short story falls under? Well, you're probably going to have to answer that in the Kahoot challenge, so I'm not going to tell you, but think back to when we talked about author's purpose. Think about the examples that we talked about, and where would you place a short story? Alright, so now here's the activity. I want you to read a story by H.H. Munro, also known as Saki, which is called The Interlopers. I'm so sorry. Okay, there's a link there for the story. I've also posted the link on Remind. After you read the story, then you're going to access the link to the Kahoot challenge. If you can't press on that link, which I've also posted on the Remind page, the pin that you need to use is 070666642. Okay? What will you see in this challenge? You will see questions related to the topics that we just discussed, obviously as they pertain to the story. So basically expect to find questions about story elements, and also expect to find questions about reading comprehension. I want to make sure that you've read the story. It's very good. And I've made this Kahoot challenge because I know how much you like Kahoot. Now, I know it's different. It's a different experience. It's not like we do it in the classroom. You're all going to do it at your own time, but I still hope that you'll have fun. The Kahoot challenge is going to be active until next Saturday at 8 a.m. So you have a whole week to do this challenge, okay? If you have any questions, if you have any difficulty with accessing the Kahoot challenge, let me know on the rewind. Let's rewind that. Let me know on the Remind page, and I will help you as best as I can. All right, well, that's it for today. I hope you were able to review some of these topics and the newer concepts. I hope you were able to understand them, and we'll talk next week. Bye, everyone.